Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Source for Tomorrow, powered by CommonShare. This is the questions and answers and networking session from our Net Zero panel, which we held earlier on this week. I am delighted to be joined with some of the panelists. So we have Ben Gunneberg from PEFC International and Jeff Yorzik from HelloFresh joining us. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves just to start off with, that would be lovely.
Yes.
Ben, shall we start with you?
Thank you very much. Yes.
No
My name is Ben Gunneberg. I am the CEO and Secretary General of the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification. That's a worldwide recognition system for national forest certification standards for sustainable forest management.
Fantastic, lovely. Thank you very much, Ben. And Jeff, if you wouldn't mind starting off with a quick introduction as well.
Sure, thank you. Jeff Yorzik with HelloFresh US. We are an international meal kit company in about 14 countries. Many people will recognize the name, and very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And we also have Sam, who's just joined us too. So Sam was the moderator of the panel, Sam from TerraPass. Sam, if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourselves, and then I'm gonna pass over to Martin as well.
Sure, happy to. Sam Talene, Director of Renewable Solutions for TerraPass. Just for background, TerraPass is a mission-based company. Our focus is reducing as much carbon emissions as we can, and we do that through two primary ways: carbon footprinting tools and services for our clients, and then helping our clients find carbon offsets and carbon offset projects that are achieving meaningful carbon impact that meets their goals. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. And also thank you so much for moderating the session too. It was very insightful. And so we have our founder of CommonShare joining us today. So I want to introduce you all as well to Martin.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks so much, guys, for joining for our Q&A session. So I think we should just get right in because we don't have a whole lot of time. We've got a couple of back-to-back sessions here. But there's a few questions that I wanted to start off with that we got in response to the panel. And so I'm going to start with these. I'm going to start these actually focused on Ben on PEFC because there were a number of questions. So one that came in was, I have a small brand and I'm trying to figure out sustainable packaging. What's the easiest way to do this?
Okay, that's a fairly straightforward. For sustainable packaging, if you can, first of all, you can move towards paper-based packaging, then you should basically have first of all, a procurement policy. You should be looking for only getting certified material. There's a lot of it around. There's two systems. There's PEFC and there's FSC. They're the two global systems that are there. So that's what I would do. The other thing about it is, of course, also keep looking when you're thinking circular economy. Also look at recycled material. 90% of all the materials that for cardboard boxes are, for example, from recycled material. And you can only recycle that material about 6 times. Then you need to have new fiber in there. So always make sure that it's either recycled or certified to PEFC and or FSC.
Cool. And then I think the way, so the certification obviously makes a lot of sense, but how does a CEO of a small company actually find how do they actually go about finding kind of a packaging company to work with? Are there easy ways to do that?
Oh yes, I mean, look, if you go to the websites, you'll find all the companies that are actually certified. There's 20,000 companies certified. So if you go to the website and actually look for certified packaging under our Find Certified section on the website, www.pefc.org, you'll find all the companies that are supplying that material. They have telephone numbers, they have contact details of the companies there. So that's one of the ways that you can do it. And then, of course, the other thing is to let all of your suppliers know that from now on you're looking for certified material. And if they don't know much about that, get them to get in touch with us. We'll help them on their way to get their own certification, so they can start supplying, the small companies with that material. It's important that more and more people ask for this. If you create the demand, then the supply certainly is there, and it will follow.
Cool. And then another question that came up for you is, what's the difference between PEFC, FSC, and SFI?
So SFI is part of PEFC, okay. And FSC is another certification system. So like, you have Coca-Cola, Pepsi, you have got all these different brands. There are a couple of suppliers out there. There's the two largest ones which are regarded as credible and sustainable are both PEFC and FSC. So you can have a look at them. We're larger. We have 325 million hectares. They have a few more chain of custodies than we do. But we're competitors, but we're also colleagues because we have the joint aim of promoting sustainable forest management worldwide and contributing to the circular bio-based economy. So I would say if you've got a procurement policy, make it easy on yourself. Use both because some suppliers will be PFC, others will be FSC.
Okay, great. And then one last one that's coming is you mentioned in the panel an inclusive procurement policy. Does that just effectively mean certified materials, or is there a more holistic kind of definition of that and how you would set one up?
Yes, of course. I mean, we have. I'm happy to help with that. Some examples of procurement policies. And actually, if you give my details, I'll make those available, or I'll get my staff to make that available. But what I mean by inclusive procurement policies, I mean that basically you take certified material, which is basically either PFC and or FSC. You do recycled material as well, and of course, then there are materials which are mixed. So that's sort of like controlled sources. So there's PFC and FSC controlled sources as well. So all that means that basically there's no controversial sources within the material. So that way you should be able to cover all the various aspects. If you include PFC, you'll automatically include SFI as well.
Okay, cool. So there's a question that's come in, but I'm actually going to go kind of a little bit broader than this question because it's a question, Jeff, for you, or Sam, for you rather. Actually, no, it's for Jeff. But I want to go a little bit broader. So when it comes to sustainable packaging, who is the onus of responsibility on? Is it realistic that consumers are actually going to recycle, especially in a climate where more and recycled waste is just effectively being burned, or it's pretended to be recycled? And so I get there's a really specific question for HelloFresh, but I wanted to broaden it out to the whole panel. And so who's effectively responsible for this packaging waste, and how do you think that's actually going to change over the course of the coming years?
No, it's an excellent question. I think packaging is probably one of the larger questions of the decade we're going to see over the next 8 or 10 years attacked here in a very positive way. I think it's the question has sort of come of age. So when we look at that, I think first of all we can say that packaging is not perfect, and it's got a long way to go in terms of what's available. Certainly, I think a company has a very strong responsibility to make it as easy as possible on our customers and to respond to their needs. You get in some really interesting challenges in packaging of how do we deliver on a sustainable packaging when we have other criteria involved, such as food quality and safety at HelloFresh, which tends to be paramount in our consideration of making sure we get that food to a customer at the level of quality it was sent, and of course safely. The packaging options are not as robust as we would like them to be. So frankly, I mean, at HelloFresh, we've spent a lot of time trying to work on our own. We've set up packaging laboratories in Europe and in the US here, and really tried to look at what we can do. We partnered with a lot of suppliers to try and push that edge a little bit, but we have found that asking suppliers for more sustainable materials had a limit, especially when we bump into things like food quality and safety that can be so challenging to work around. And so we've really started to take matters into our own hands in a lot of ways. So to get back to your original question, I think, whose responsibility is it? There's a lot of people in that chain. Certainly, we should expect as individuals in our homes that we will do the right thing with a piece of packaging. However, if we look at the fact that we might have to drive 20 miles to a drop-off center, that's more than we try to expect of our customers. We try to make it as simple as possible. And so in the end, a sustainable piece of packaging is something that does what it's supposed to do, no matter what a customer does. So if they throw it on the ground, it biodegrades on its own. If they throw it in a compost pile, it composts on its own. If they throw it in a landfill, it doesn't create emissions. These materials barely work, although I will say, kind of just described wood fiber, but there are various limitations there. So I'd be curious what everybody else is thinking.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, but I'll open it up to the panel first.
Martin, can I just jump in there quickly? I mean, one of the things that we need to realize is that, I mean, it's you know, as Jeff says, it's everybody's responsibility. We have to make sure that we provide sustainable packaging in the first place, and basically, you know, reduce the carbon footprints, make sure that there's materials that are stored, make sure that it's not actually sort of oil-based carbon producing packaging that's being used. So first of all, that's the first onus. The second thing is that we also just need to be aware from an economic point of view. For society, you know, in Asia, it costs you, for 1 ton of waste, it costs you $375 if you throw it away and all the various associated costs with that. But if you manage it, you can actually get the cost down to $50 to $100 per ton. So there are so there's always also authorities, local authorities are involved with that, and ultimately it's about our education, our communication with customers, and and I'm sure that Jeff will support me when I say that's part of the education process with customers. You know, use the packaging, recycle it responsibly. But if we actually provide the good stuff in the first place, then it's easier for people to then do the recycling as well. And we know that as a society, it's cheaper to manage that material and get that carbon dioxide emissions down. So it's a collective effort, and we all have to work together. But as producers and suppliers and people, small SMEs, we need to make sure our customers can make good choices.
Yeah. I'll jump in and just add one more item. There's a role for government here as well. In the US here, we have basically from city to city, you have different recycling requirements. And it's, I think that might get to the core of the question here, is that it can start to ask too much of a customer. And frankly, it makes it very difficult for a company to respond to when you have broadly very different requirements from city to city and state to state. And so putting together really national approaches towards recycling that really reinforce the ability to catch that material, to ensure it's handled properly. There's a key role there. You know, it's I personally believe it's my responsibility as a consumer to do the right thing. But after I've done the right thing, it has to go to the right place. And there's a role of government there. There's a role of corporations to put the right material into my hands. But there's a very strong role for governments to create that ecosystem of companies that can catch it, reprocess it, and in fact, make it into a circular material, in fact, as opposed to in theory.
So Jeff, on that, why do you think that hasn't happened yet? Is it a CapEx problem? Is it that it's just easier to burn? It's easier to send to China until they said no. We're not taking your waste anymore. I mean, like, why? You know, I'm in Europe right now, and I guess two aspects of the challenge that I have around recycling, or the kind of the post-consumer waste element of this when we're talking about sustainable packaging is one. You know, it's really complicated to do this, even in the countries that do it well. And then two, who should pay for this? I mean, Ben mentioned choice editing, and effectively, you know, choice editing the materials and not even giving the consumer the option to choose a package that's not compostable or not recyclable. But even when something's compostable or recyclable, it has to be done in the right way. Otherwise, it's not going to actually compost, right? And so, so I guess given the role that you're in and that you guys are a publicly traded company, how do you think about the investments that need to be made? I mean, is it this effectively, you mentioned regulation, does there just need to be tax on this stuff? Or is it, are there particular countries that do this well? And has it been the public sector that's led the investment on post-consumer waste, or have there actually been profitable opportunities for the private sector to really play a role? What have you seen that's been really effective at a macro level?
So it's a fantastic question. There's kind of a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I think so. What I think you're getting at is this concept of extended producer responsibility, or EPR. We've definitely seen different levels of it. Certainly in some countries, especially over in Europe, there's essentially deposit programs for companies that have to pay to use certain pieces of disposable packaging. Over here in the US, we're seeing EPR rules just starting to kind of surface and get into conversation, especially out on the West Coast, California, Washington. So there's a piece that's tied to this that I think you brought up very well, is that, what's the role of sort of public investment? And public investment starts to lead itself towards, what will local markets accept? Where's the profitability of that? There's been good amounts of profitability, I think. Wood fiber is extremely well recycled, and it has great value. So there's plenty of economic opportunity there. When we start looking at more of the plastics industry, we see less of that economic opportunity. And in fact, transporting that material very hard or very far can make it not worth it, so to speak. So the public investment piece has worked to a point. And I think that's why we're starting to see extended producer responsibility and really there's an interplay here again between this concept of regulatory systems standardizing what we should be using as a company, what packaging producers should be providing as options, and matching that up to how the systems can sort of catch it effectively. But then at some point, how do we pay for it effectively? If you're going to start really standardizing that system, it's very difficult to do that with public investment. And so I think that's why we're seeing the extended producer responsibility programs come up that are pulling that from corporations who are basically using those materials to fund those programs. Here in North America, British Columbia has seen excellent results with extended producer responsibility. They've really had a fantastic success story there that's really worth looking into.
Okay, interesting.
Martin, it's also worth saying a lot of it also depends on what kind of regulatory framework you're in. I was just thinking, even as a private individual, I have a very big incentive to recycle because actually I get charged by the weight of the bin that gets collected at my door every week. I get 12 free charges a year, and that's it. After that, I have to pay. So actually taking anything and everything to the recycling is already an incentive that, you give that to a Scotsman, that's what we do. But we'll do that. But then there are other things. There's like the European directives, packaging directives, which is aiming to reduce packaging by 50 to 65% for governments to do that. And that then gives the incentives to actually go and do recycling. In Germany, they actually collect it at the door. In France, we're not as advanced yet. We still have to take it away ourselves as individual, and that has impacts as well because everybody's suddenly getting into their car, charging that up to drive down to take away the recycling. It would be better if they actually came around and collected it with the rest of the waste. So there's lots of incentive there. Also, in Germany and other places like that, whenever you have any plastic bottles, you get 5 cents whenever you hand it back in. You see all the kids running around handing the bottles in to get the money, to get pocket money, whatever else it is. So there are lots of ways of doing it, but it does take a public-private partnership. And I think the younger generations are much better at it. I'm a forester. I've been involved in forestry for many years. It was only when I graduated that I realized that paper can only be recycled 5 or 6 times. Now, my 5-year-old son, when he was 5 years old, he told me that because that's what he learned at school. And it was like, wow. So the level of education is going up. It's required. You need to have it as state laws if you're in the US, or even federal laws. More and more, you just basically have to do that. And we should be optimistic because we know that over 70 countries in the world have committed to net zero by 2050. So they're going to have to put in place regulations to do that. And so we as companies, or we as service providers, have to do whatever we can. People are being encouraged to do that. Governments have to play their part, and together, working together, joined up thinking, joined up working together, we can really start getting those percentages down. And make sure people are recycling properly and get most effective use of the bioeconomy.
Cool, awesome, thank you. So then there was this really specific question that kind of this leads into, and maybe we've answered about half of it. But when an investor is considering ESG risk in delivery companies, I think they're saying, HelloFresh here, that create a lot of waste. How should they think about potential exposure?
How should they think about exposure?
Well, what's material, I guess, within a company like yours? Like, what does materiality mean?
Yeah. So to some extent, it's probably not appropriate for me to answer investor level questions here. So I'll just start there. However, you know, materiality, there's two pieces of materiality. I mean, there's financial materiality, and then there's what we call sustainable materiality, which would be an approach that was really developed and popularized through the Global Reporting Initiative, of looking at your business and seeing what's important both to investors and the public, as well as your business model. So, you know, there's various approaches to that, but I guess what I would say is when you're looking at that as an investor, it would come down to, in many ways, I think what we're seeing in ESG investing as well is what evidence do you have that the company is paying attention to this? What evidence do you have that they're taking action on it? Because as we've seen, companies that have some form of a recognizable sustainability program are, yeah, I'm trying to make sure I just don't overstate myself, because we are preparing to release our earnings. So there is evidence.
I don't want to put you in an awkward position.
Yeah, there is evidence in the ESG investing sector that companies that manage these issues tend to be more stable and tend to be have more robust results in the face of kind of what you might call system shocks and things like that. So from a materiality perspective, I think it's looking at is the company taking it seriously, and what are they doing about it? Are they taking action? Because if you're looking at risk, the question then is, how is the company managing that risk?
Right. Okay. So I guess then, Sam, that kind of gets to your business model, right? Around kind of or a portion of your business model. So I wonder kind of how much the onus, if the onus is not going to be on the company, or it's actually the first time I heard this, the EPR risk, or the extended producer responsibility. How much does this fall on the actual consumer to take responsibility for their actions, or through offsets, or through, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out here through these questions and weaving them together is, you know, where does the responsibility lie for achieving net zero, and how much of it relies on the regulator, how much of it relies on the company, and how much of it actually relies on the consumer, and what's actually realistic?
Yeah, no, that's a very big question. And I think at this point, what I see in the roadmap of this kind of progression to kind of a zero emission economy is, I think we're in a phase now where there is maybe a need for greater individual action in terms of, zeroing their carbon footprint. And that is kind of the key to the platform that we offer is the ability to do that. But also, as we work with, businesses, one of the things we're seeing is that what is going to be, being delivered to the customer is increasingly lower carbon footprint, or over time zero carbon footprint. So I think a long-term vision, my hope for the long-term trajectory of this is that we get to a point, we get to an economy where what is coming to the consumer in many ways is very low emission. So hopefully over time, really businesses kind of carry the mantle to deliver zero emission products and services, and the burden on individuals and consumers is reduced. But that is a many decade journey. So our goal is to provide solutions that help people achieve net zero today, as we work on getting to that end game that we're all looking for.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that, or switching gears?
I think Ben put it very well, that it is everybody's responsibility, and so corporations need to be taking their position, but individuals need to be taking their position as well, and governments.
Okay.
So I was just thinking. Sure. I was just thinking while you were all talking about the packaging questions, which is just fascinating, how this applies to buildings, because, buildings is an enormous consumer of materials. Having spent a lot of time on construction sites myself, also a huge producer of waste. And so in this case, while we're kind of sort of thinking about the producer and the consumer, there's a really important middle actor here in terms of the designer. And how you can optimize materials and reduce the amount of waste comes from the design process. And we're seeing the design community design around standard sizing of panels or framing systems to reduce the amount of manipulation on site. So no matter how much effort a producer puts into reducing that material, it will still have a waste stream on site. And so the person who really has an impact on reducing that waste stream is actually the middle person, would be the designer. And then again, you have the same challenges around the treatment of that waste, but at enormous scales, and the amount of handling it requires to make sure that we're kind of separating the different waste streams on site is enormous. It's sort of several full-time staff over every day out there sorting through the waste. So having the opportunity to reduce that waste generation at source, whether that be through modern methods of construction or reducing the amount that that materials need to actually be cut down on site, has an enormous impact on reducing those waste streams in the first place. Well, and therefore everyone's responsibility.
Okay, fair enough. There actually, that leads right into kind of a great question for you, Victoria, which is, what are the best design tools for evaluating how to build with lower carbon impact? I mean, it's less macro and pretty specific, but I don't know if you have specific tools that you could recommend, or specific programs, or.
Yeah, sure. And I think it very much depends on what the goals are for the project, and also the location of the project, because some tools have built into them the baseline standards for that particular the location where you're building. So you can literally select the location of the site and it would immediately help you design against the local requirements and codes. So some of the more sophisticated tools are fantastic at being able to calculate the amount of materials as you're designing, and therefore the amount of embodied carbon, as you're selecting different material choices, or depending on the massing of your building, and how much of your ratio of glazing to wall, for example, how that will affect your energy consumption, the position and orientation of your building. So there are some really great design tools that allow you to make those decisions and understand the impacts of those really early design decisions that, once they're locked in, affect the performance for the entire life of that building. And maybe we can follow up with some of the lists of these things, because they're so, some of them are freely available and some of them may not be. But then there's also tools like Edge from the IFC, that is a web-based tool that can allow you to, again, right from the very beginning of a design process, understand the implication of design decisions on building performance, which is really what we're focused on now, not just how a building's designed to perform, but how it actually performs during its life cycle. The availability of tools to calculate embodied carbon impacts are a little bit lower, because again, it's really down to the availability of data from producers, from materials providers, to make sure that we're plugging in the right amounts of data and the right quality of data into these tools, so that you can make a decision over maybe one different material to another, but also the type of material and the kind of recycled content of that material, where that material comes from. There's a lot of complexity. So there's often a combination of tools that's the right approach, unfortunately, but it would actually enable you to make sure that you're getting the best outcome. And for designers in particular, some of the biggest CAD and software models have plugins that allow you to kind of track the performance of the intended design through those different design processes. What's absolutely remarkable is this role of technology in enabling this to happen. You can be in a design meeting and the client can say, well, what about this? And then you can literally change it in real time in the meeting, and you can instantly see the impact on the energy performance, the carbon emissions, the usability of that building, which is wild. That's just something that has happened, since I left architecture school. And for that, you would have necessarily had to go away, do the modeling for a couple of weeks, and come back and then present, actually that change you asked for would affect the performance of the building. So, that's huge. And, again, to kind of draw some of the synergies with the other panelists, we were talking about the consumer and the end user. Let's not forget about the end user here. If as a designer you're building you're designing a building that is unmanageable, that building will use more energy. If it's too complicated in terms of the systems that have been specified, and the user at the end of the day cannot understand how to make sure that building's performing optimally, then ultimately it will result in higher energy consumption. So the end user always has to be in mind in this, and it could be as simple as, you know, if a design team specifies a light bulb that comes from the other side of the world, when you replace those light bulbs, you have to get the light bulbs from the other side of the world. You can't just pop down to the local DIY store. So you always have to bear the end consumer in mind.
Fascinating. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears here because you answered the next kind of two questions I was going to ask related to that in that question. So, so Sam, one question for you is what are the most frequent questions you get from companies trying to take control of their climate impact?
Yeah, one of the and it's interesting. We had a chance to talk about that a little bit in the panel, and a lot of companies mostly come to TerraPass and just say, where do I start? You know, there's a lot of news about the company is going to be, net zero by this date. What do I need to do? And you know, I think our team is really spends a lot of time trying to work with companies through that process and help them navigate the steps that are right for them. And so one of the things I really loved about the panel was just hearing all the specific cases about how you basically take steps into this path to kind of emission reduction. And so what we will always advise customers on is kind of the three priorities. Number one, calculate. And Jeff did a great job of pointing out, like, we've got to be able to measure it if we're going to take action on it. And so we always work with them to make sure you can see what you're trying to address, and then talk about priority number two, make sure you can reduce it. What can you reduce? And then go after that. So a lot of their questions come into, where does offsetting fit in? And we always advise them, like, offsetting is what you need to be doing after you have achieved the reductions you can achieve. And then you want to make sure you're bringing yourself to kind of net zero carbon emissions after that. And so we really just walk them through the process of, what are your goals? What do you want to address and reduce? And then, how can we offset your remaining footprint? So we really just try to bring clarity to the path they want to go down.
Okay. And on that kind of point, I think, one thing that's changed, particularly in the last couple of months, is just the outlook or the role that the U.S. is going to play on the world stage again, or actually play a role on the world stage. And so I guess, when you are working with a company and they're trying to figure out, okay, how seriously do I have to take this? I mean, for everyone in the room here, we obviously have probably all been thinking about sustainability for 10 or 20 years. And there was an option, I think, for US companies to not care about this up until recently. And I think that option's gone now. And so given the regulatory environment in the US, how do you, and again, I guess, Jeff, you can't speak, completely on this. And so maybe Victoria, maybe Ben, you could jump in as well. But how do you think that the regulatory environment is going to shift over the course of the next 4 years? And what do companies need to be preparing for as we move more aggressively towards, a path that puts a price on carbon worldwide?
Sure.
Alex, I'll take a spot here first, Sam, I think. So I think what you're referring to in sort of in the background of your question here, Martin, is this concept of a maturity pathway. Are we complying with the regulations as an organization, or are we getting out in front of it in ways that are important to our customers, important to our investors, and important to society in general? Certainly at HelloFresh, we've taken a very aggressive approach on carbon. That's pretty old news, frankly. But if a company is really looking right now at, I think we're going to get regulated on this, we better move. Yeah, you'd better move, because I mean, in any other part of a company, we don't think about like just making sure we're keeping up with regulation. If you're not getting out in front of it, then you're probably somewhat behind it.
Victoria, I don't know.
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think there is definitely a renewed sense of hope, let's say, and inspiration with the new administration. But at a city, state, and business level, I don't think that hope necessarily went anywhere. With climate action, in the past 4 years, there's this huge "we are still in" movement from the US, and we're seeing some really inspiring action from state governors and from cities and the businesses that is, as you say, are really in trying to make sure they're ahead of that curve, because they can see that it's expected now from citizens, from investors. I don't think we should be waiting on regulation for an excuse not to move or not to set a net zero target or something that prepares you for a future net zero economy, because that is coming and you need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I would just add to that, carbon pricing, because if you're going for net zero yourself, you're trying to obviously avoid getting involved in carbon pricing. But by 2010, maybe about 5% of carbon emissions were covered by carbon pricing. It's gone up to 15% now, and China's about to come on board as well. So the IMF recently said that you needed a carbon price ton of $75 a ton in order to keep to the 2 degrees percentage climate change targets. And so at the moment, the EU price is about $24. So, it's gone up from $8. So carbon's going to become more expensive. So the quicker you can actually work out how to start reducing that yourself, the less of an extra, let's say, fiscal or financial burden you're going to get later on. So we need to really start looking also at things like, the innovative design for the circular economy, very, very much looking at production design, as Victoria was talking about, making sure that you don't have that waste, and actually also turning waste into resources. That's another thing that you have to look at. So you can basically close the loops on the recoverables as well. These are all various areas that we're going to really have to start working on, because sooner or later you're going to be charged for it. And so the sooner you get into it, like Jeff's done, like Victoria's proposing, like Sam's advising people to do, the better for you, because it's just going to become very expensive later on. And so let's all start getting it down in a voluntary way and actually make money doing it.
Yeah, I think it's become more expensive too in the last couple of weeks, right? The spot price has gone up to, I think it's above 40 now, 40 euros in the EU ETS.
You're right, you're up to date.
So, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I don't know if that's just because of broad, general inflationary pressure on all assets, given the likely continued easing in the United States. I guess a follow-up question on that, given Victoria, you're in London, and Ben, I think you're over here in Europe as well. Do you see policy alignment now between the EU 27 and the United States, or are we entering kind of a new, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, but effectively a new arbitrage, I guess, between sustainability regulation in the EU and the UK and the US? I mean, now that we've had Brexit, how do you think the policy environment is going to change for companies that aren't kind of in the early stages and are actually managing across multiple regulatory environments, like Jeff, your company?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if we're kind of quite ready to say that we've reached a tipping point yet, but we certainly seem to have had enough momentum built by cities and countries and even businesses declaring climate emergencies and saying, actually, we really need to do something about this now, that we're seeing more of a kind of questioning on those who aren't taking this action. From a building policy point of view, there's only a handful of countries who are setting nationally determined contributions for the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement, and have building energy codes at all. And then those that do have building energy codes mostly just don't stack up in terms of what we need to, and in the meantime, people are building buildings that are not fit for purpose and going to have to be renovated in the future. Like, we're literally designing buildings and building buildings now that are not fit for purpose. And we know that as an industry, and yet we're still doing it. And so I think we're going to see a lot more rapid uptake in the sorts of policy we finally need, and a lot more criticism against those that just don't go far enough. And that extends right across the world. You know, it's certainly not a case of someone else's problem that has to happen right across the board. I don't think we can really wholeheartedly say that anyone has got it right yet.
Yeah, I would just add that. I mean, I was speaking to a former director of forestry in India this morning, and he was basically telling me that only last year did the building codes now allow the use of wood. Before that, it was all concrete. So, you know, people are looking at what other countries are doing, what other industry associations are doing. You know, yes, we may have sort of some political divergences and so on, but ultimately companies operating globally, everybody is looking faster across the water to see what's going on and what's happening. And I think when we all meet in Glasgow, there'll be, with all the contributions coming in there, there'll be some more commitment to that. And I think people are really going to be seeing how can we actually go about doing that, learning from people like Victoria and from Jeff and from others, from their associations and so on, and from Sam. This is the way it's going to go. And I actually really think that although you may have divergence there, the fact that we're all going for some global targets here on this will also mean that there'll be actually convergence, will make it easier for companies to operate as well.
Great. Jeff, Sam, anything you want to add there? I know you're kind of across the pond, so to speak. Or Jeff, I don't know where you are. I know you're the U.S. director, but I'm not sure where you're actually based.
Oh, I'm in the Denver area, actually.
Okay.
So no, I don't think I have a whole lot to add there. From a regulatory perspective, I mean, you know, we watch it, we try to stay ahead of it. We've taken a pretty aggressive approach. We will use it as a business tool if our competitors fail to.
So in talking to you all, you know, we only have a few minutes left, so I think we should go to kind of final words here, unless any of you want to ask a question of each other. So I'll give that opportunity and let me know if you do. But I guess in talking to you all, you know, I feel like we don't have, it seems very upbeat, and most of this stuff is solved, right? And so I guess what are the issues that keep you up at night as it relates to kind of the concept of net zero, or moving to a world where we're moving towards net zero, like, or carbon neutrality? Where are the areas where you're like, look, that is actually a big area where people need to be thinking about, and we're not thinking about it? Because a lot of the answers that I'm hearing from you today, I feel like there's just a lot of people, clever people, thoughtful people thinking and working on these particular issues. And it seems like with the right economics, with the right incentives, with the right regulation, these things will get solved. But I guess, you know, final point from each of you, what are areas, or what are kind of big chunks of this problem that are not solved, that people need to keep on their radar, and particularly those that are thinking about this either from an investment perspective or from an entrepreneurial perspective, should be thinking about as both opportunities and risks?
Yeah, if you want me to, I'll come in on that one immediately. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems, and you know, I can say that we're quite guilty of that in the forestry sector, is that we tend to be all still in silo thinking mode. You know, just as a quick example, you know, I would never go out and say that the solution to all of the construction world's problem is to use wood, because that's a load of nonsense, and that's not the way it is. It's about optimizing. It's about working together. It's about working out what are the best solutions, and I think we have to do that in so many areas. So it's not just a question of moving over to better materials. It's also about better design. It's about reducing you know, waste through better design, working in the circular bio-based economy into that. So there's a lot of challenges there, because people are still very much focused on what they're doing on their own. And so we need to have a lot more stakeholder involvement about how do we collectively come to those targets, and how do we actually achieve those targets We can't just do that by sitting in our silos. We have to get out of our comfort zones, like I am participating in this event, for example, to actually start thinking not just about sustainable forestry, but actually what are the impacts on all of this towards, ensuring that we get a net zero carbon and stop climate change. So that keeps me awake that we're not doing that enough yet. But I think we're going in the right direction, Martin. I think we've got to be optimistic, but I'll pass over to somebody else now.
Sure, I can jump in. From a TerraPass perspective, there's I think the biggest thing that keeps us awake at night, I suppose, is how do you reach more people with this, with climate action, with taking steps to reduce emission and offset emissions. And one of the amazing things is just when we still just run into so many people who, when you talk to them about, how they can take action, how they can kind of support carbon reduction, you just still continue to hear so frequently, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I had no idea I could do this. I had no idea the ways I could make an impact. So for us is really trying to get climate action and carbon reduction from, early adopters and really committed environmentalists to be mainstream. And so that's a huge mission for us.
Yeah, and perhaps I can follow on because I have a similar answer, I suppose, to Sam. We frequently run polls about the remaining barriers towards achieving a common vision for decarbonisation, and the answers that always come out on top, that we always expect to come out on top, are lack of regulation and lack of financial incentive, which is a given. We know that that's still a challenging part of the market for us to overcome. The lowest answers are always the sorts of technology that's out there and the industry knowledge. So that tells us that we know how to do net zero in buildings, and we know that the solutions, the technology are market ready. They're literally there. We also know increasingly that the business case is stronger and stronger, that you can actually design to net zero for no additional cost. The third highest barrier is lack of demand. So we've overcome the financial barriers, we've overcome the technical barriers, and what remains is the perceptual barriers. And it's just about asking the questions, understanding what net zero means to you as an organization, taking any steps you can forward. And if you can't quite make a net zero declaration or a commitment, think about a net zero roadmap for your organization, how to get yourselves net zero ready, but certainly don't use that kind of I suppose, nervousness or hesitancy as a reason not to do anything at all.
Right on. I'll just echo, most of what we've heard here. I mean, being in the U.S. especially, what keeps me up at night is how do we create a common agenda? How do we create commonly agreed upon principles and priorities, and a common agenda for achieving it?
Okay. Yeah, so there's a bigger issue of just kind of probably in the US and to a certain extent, I think it's happening over here now and definitely happening. I mean, you see it in South Asia recently, just, agreeing on what the facts are so you can actually make a plan for how to move forward. Well, this is great, everyone. I really appreciate all of your time. Thanks for joining Source for Tomorrow. And we really enjoyed having you, and I appreciate you participating in both the panel and this Q&A session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great Friday.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.